Welcome to the second panel. Please be seated. This second panel is on privacy. Privacy is quintessential in a democratic state, so it didn't surprise me at all that the first panel discussed privacy and that the second panel will discuss democracy. This is the way it goes. This is the challenge to disentangle two persons to come up with with cases taken out of reality, to put not as an intermezzo, but to make things a little bit contextualized. So I first want to pass the floor to Max Schrems, a student with an interesting Facebook story to tell us. Go ahead.
A short introduction why I'm sitting here. We are from a group, it's called Europe versus Facebook. I'll just give you a brief overview of what we did. I was writing a paper at my university in the US where a guest speaker from Facebook was there, and there were guest speakers from other IT companies from the Silicon Valley. And my feeling, as I was the only European there and all the others were Americans, the approach was, yeah, there are regulations in Europe, but we interpret them a little different, and if they find out that we don't stick to them, there's not really a penalty anyways. That was what I got in these classes. So I was set up and said, okay, let's write a paper about it. So we produced a 551st paper that found out that Facebook is not sticking to European laws. But that was not the point where we stopped. The next thing we did is we found out that actually the Irish data protection is responsible for Facebook in Europe. And we filed 22 complaints there. And it was kind of a little test of, let's see what happens if you actually do that. Because everyone is discussing, if you discuss about privacy, one of the first things that come up is Facebook. And everyone is saying, hey, that's not okay what they're doing, but no one does anything. And that was our interesting outcome. Right now, the fight is about really basic things. We think it's about 10, 20,000 people that made access requests. Richard Allan is going to be able to give you the right number. But that's kind of our number that we think people made access requests right now. None of them is getting any of the background data. They only get the data they put up. I personally got the background data, so we know it's there, but that is something so basic as an access request that we're right now fighting in Ireland against Facebook, a huge company. Other things is transparency. I really read through every little... Don't drop anything, Richard. It's not that bad. Okay. Another thing we went through was transparency. There is, of course, a privacy policy that everyone that is on Facebook has read, and it's about 12 pages long. I'm a law student, and I can still not tell you what Facebook is doing with my data. In the not current, but the data protection directive they had before, it said the only sentence that actually said what they're doing with our data there was they are providing an efficient, customized, and safe experience. Any gym could say the same sentence. I mean, how should any customer ever know what they're consenting here? Other things is that in my data sets, there were huge amounts of deleted data in there. Something that's so basic that if someone pushes a delete button, the thing should be actually gone. It's not on Facebook. So we're talking about very super basic things here. I was now going to a lot of media places, panels like here, and what I got from people is that a lot of them are afraid and they're losing trust on the internet. A big thing you get back is, oh, I better just log off Facebook. I don't touch it anymore. Like my mom is freaking out. She's in the 60s. She's like, oh my God, I never go on the internet anymore. And that is the problem we're facing, that there is new technology that we all want to use, and that's good technology. I'm still on Facebook. I love social media. The problem is that there are some companies that are, especially in the case of social media, has a monopoly on it pretty much. All your friends are on this one website, and they are not sticking to most basic laws. One of the reasons for that is, and one question I always get is, why doesn't anyone do anything? And I'm sitting there, I have no idea. It's like, I'm a 24-year-old student. Why does it take me to bring the Facebook case about? I mean, it's totally ridiculous if you think about it. And one of the reasons is that we don't have serious enforcement in Europe. We do have nice laws, but no one enforces them at all. In the case of Facebook in Ireland, the only thing the Irish Data Protection Commission can do is issue an enforcement notice. That's a piece of paper saying to Facebook, dear Facebook, please stick to our laws. If you don't, and only if you don't do it at that time then, you can face a fine of up to 100,000 euro. In Austria, it's just 20,000 euro. If you see the budget of Facebook, that's nothing. The absurd thing about it is it's smarter for them to wait to an enforcement notice than doing it right at the beginning. I'm comparing this sometimes to a parking violation. If the officer, you park in the wrong spot and the officer comes to you and gives you a piece of paper saying, could you please move your car in the next 1 week, and if you don't, you pay €1.50 as a fine. That's kind of how we're actually doing it right now, and that's a huge problem. And I see that a whole lot of times that we're discussing about digital forgetting, about all these things that are really important as well, but we're not really getting through the most basic things in this case.
Okay, Max.
And that is the biggest message I got to bring about here.
Yeah. Okay. The Republicans have Joe the plumber. We now have Max, the Facebook student. Last speaker is not announced in the program. She's actually swapping.
Reagan. I'm Reagan McDonald.
Yeah, I wanted to say Reagan McDonald.
I thought you were.
I have the data here. Okay, Reagan, you have a last say in this panel before we start a discussion.
Any personally identifiable information stored by an online service should require explicit and informed consent. And Max was also mentioning the issue of terms of service agreements. And users turn to the internet and they're kind of almost forced to agree with these terms of services that are drafted by private companies. They don't always include the kind of rights-respecting language that we expect in democracies. So unfortunately, due to prevalent monopolies or dysfunctional markets, they're used to just accept the terms. And you shouldn't need a PhD or a law degree to be able to understand what you're being asked and what kind of rights you're giving away.
Let's start with the first speaker, Andreas.
Thank you.
With whom did you disagree most? And then...
I would put it the other way around. To identify with whom I agree most, I would definitely name Max Schrems, because I think he described very well what the problem is, especially with his 60-year-plus old mother that is now some little bit afraid of the internet because it's so dangerous there. And I think this is one of the really main points. If we want to use this technology for business, if we want to use it for communication and so on, if we want our societies to rely on these technologies, on this mass communication, on our objects, on our products to communicate with each other, then one of the most basic things that we need is trust.
Treating torts and damages, who do we call? I mean, what do we claim on? Who is going to eventually come down with the hard stick of a heavy fine or a heavy a posteriori requirement for apology or whatever other things that exist in other media. This at the moment there is no decision from there, and I would recommend that the Council of Europe make a few proposals and see how they fly with the different groups they are talking with. So we need something to bridge the soft law versus hard.
That Google is playing nice. But what about all the little organizations? Which brings me on to what Max said. It links directly. I happen to be the first person in the United Kingdom, possibly in Europe, but perhaps not, to obtain damages from a sender of unsolicited mail for the simple act of sending that unsolicited mail.
A lot of damages?
It was about €400.
Okay.
For one mail, it's not so bad. You would expect there would have been a flood of people doing the same thing. In fact, I know of about half a dozen in the UK. I'm not sure of any others. So in answer to your question, how does Facebook behave with your data? It's the same as the answer to the question, how does a large gorilla behave at a diplomatic reception? Any way it damn well likes.
Okay. Thank you. Gentleman over there. Strong images. Yeah, we need those.
Decent privacy regime, right? And we've talked about enforcement. Robust and consistent enforcement is another very important element, and an element we mustn't lose sight of, and I think this relates to your comment, is data subject awareness, so that people understand what their rights are. We've seen a number of surveys, including surveys commissioned by the Commission, which just indicate how little data subjects understand what their rights are when it comes to data protection. They don't even know about data protection authorities existing.
Ask Richard to respond to the Twitter community, and then the Mr. But first, Richard, Allan, please.
I always respond to Twitter, even when I've been called a gorilla. 3 points really. There's a lot we can say, but 3 points really. One is I've heard from the platform actually 2 examples, I think, of the system working rather well. I think it's fantastic that an ordinary citizen of the EU like Max can go to the Data Protection Agency, and the Data Protection Agency does carry out a serious and fundamental investigation of a company like ours and requires us to answer every single point he's raised with us. To me, that's the system working as it should work, that any citizen in the EU can exercise their rights through their data protection agencies. And I also heard from Rainer Stenzel again about mapping companies having to come to the table and figure things out. So the idea that companies that want to be around for a long time and have a serious reputation are somehow not required to come to the table when data protection authorities in Europe make requests of them is not realistic. We feel that pressure constantly. So one, I think the Data Protection Commission system is actually better than has been painted. Second point briefly is don't underestimate people power. Again, when you're running a service, people are very powerful. They do understand a lot of what goes on in our services, partly through reading the policies, which we do have a responsibility to make clearer over time, but also just by the use of the service. We get constant feedback on every aspect of our service because a lot of what you're doing on it is obvious as you're using it. So it doesn't just, we shouldn't just look at the policies, we should look at how people use services and the feedback they give. And then the third point is just to say that there's don't be careful what you wish for. Don't throw up trade barriers. Again, Rainer Stenzel talked about this with the mapping services, and Nigel mentioned it in terms of services from other parts of the world. The joy of the internet is a small group of people can get together, create a service, and reach a global audience. And the risk of some of the calls for regulation is that you raise barriers so high that what we effectively say is, until you've met those massive regulatory barriers, in other words, hired 200 lawyers, you can't launch your service on the internet. And that won't hurt people like us. It won't hurt the successful large companies. It really will hurt those, particularly in developing countries, who are starting new services. So it sounds like a plea to say regulate new companies less, and I think it is. But as they get bigger, you can have higher expectations of them in terms of regulatory requirements.
If they became a better person by listening to you and so on. I want these kind of emotional sharings. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Wolfgang Benedek from University of Graz and the European Training and Research Center for Human Rights and Democracy. I have 2 points. One is about the issue of self-regulation. It is the American approach, so to say. Problem solved, we are satisfied. In Europe, I think we have to go a bit deeper. If privacy is a human right, then we also have a human right to a remedy according to the European Convention.
And just to come back to that now famous gorilla statement, and the EG8, and also a few weeks ago, the CEO of LinkedIn who said that privacy is an old person issue. I just don't think that's true, and I think part of this jigsaw is making sure that, and not underestimating the user, that it is shifting in this way, and the more that users know, the more empowered they are, then they will really make that decision in the end and choose the right way.
How many points do you want to raise?
I'm trying to make it as short as possible. 2 feedbacks on Richard Allan. I do understand that Facebook is clicking the like button on European legislation and enforcement because there's just not a whole lot there. So I totally see that you like that. The other thing that obvious using you brought up, if I click an X where it says delete and I click it, as a user I would say it should be deleted. Facebook told me no, it's just removed. So I doubt that that is actually the case in this guy. But in general, what I wanted to bring up is we do have a European market, and I do think we have a European culture that might be in the privacy issue very different than in the US. I was studying there. A lot of my friends are in the US, and I like the US a whole lot, but in this point, there's just a different opinion. And I do not think that we can get one global privacy regulation. We should have one in Europe that is not so different in every country so that companies can actually stick to it, because it doesn't make sense to have 45 different regulations because no one is ever going to be able to stick to them. So we need one central thing, but that's got to be enforced in the end. And I don't think you need 100 lawyers for that. We were sitting back home with a bottle of wine for a couple of nights and filed the complaints against you. So I don't think it's all too hard to stick to that. And that is the last thing. A lot of young people got back to us, and especially young people that are using these technologies and want to use it, but don't want to worry. And that's what politics gotta take care of.
Okay, thank you.